Welcome back to another episode of the NeuroTrition Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Z. I'm a dad, I'm a doctor, and I'm here to inspire you to not only treat your symptoms, but help heal both your mind and your body. Today we have Dr. Griswold with us, who is a functional neurologist. He is an educator, and he is the operator of ShedLight Lasers. The NeuroTrition Podcast is sponsored by North Florida Spine and Wellness and produced by Juming Delmas Studios. Dr. Griswold, thank you for joining us on the show.
Thank you for having me, Matthew. I've been excited about talking.
All right, Dr. Griswold, I got a couple of just a fun little rapid fire on what red light can do. So I'm going to name a few conditions, and I just want to see yes or no if red light therapy can help these, and a quick explanation how. Depression, anxiety.
Well, absolutely. Depression and anxiety. First, I would look at whether they're expelling things from the body, feces. Number two, I would determine which side of the brain, and I know which side usually is associated with depression. Depression is a word commonly used by people who have a left brain hemisphericity. What does that big word mean? Their left brain, the left hemisphere, is stuck in sympathetic overload. Sympathetic impasse. It's an area of low voltage because it's the left side of your brain that is mostly in charge of your ambition and your hope, and it's finite. If it's weak over here and I'm strong on the right-hand side is infinity. It's where my fears live. It's where I see all the what ifs in the future that leave me in morbid reflection and depression. So what would I do? I would balance the brain. I would not only use the red light therapy or the laser therapy over that cortex, I would stimulate it from several different areas, thus strengthening that cortex to go back online, holding back the sympathetic nervous system. Next.
Okay, what about healing after injury, whether it's a fracture or a cut?
Absolutely. So what is one of the basics? This is a common research topic. Not only is there research riddled all over the internet, myself and others have a lot of experience with speeding up healing of bone. What happens? I break a big toe. I have a broken big toe. Inflammation occurs and sustains for a month before chemotaxis begins to help that bone heal. What does the laser do? It shines onto that big toe. It decreases the inflammation so blood and oxygen can enter that arena, thus creating an alkaline healing arena with osteoclast and osteoblast production, chemotaxis beginning because that blood flow is there. In other words, you take that dim light bulb that is a broken toe, and you add voltage, you brighten the light bulb, and nobody on the planet argues this. When using laser therapy of this caliber, it increases healing time by 45 to 55%. So early on in our education, and you know how hard we studied, the pressure we were under, I found an outlet in a mentor named Dr. John D'Onofrio, and he was one of the most brilliant men I've ever met. And we took a shine to one another, man crushes, like the man crush I have on you. and I traveled the country with him, starting from try 1 or try 2, and helped him teach. That would
have been in chiropractic school, right?
It is. Yeah, absolutely, in chiropractic school. And I helped him teach his long-running seminar called Y-Files, wherein a lot of us were introduced to tools that we use in the treatment room. One of those tools was a laser. Back then, that laser that I bought was about $16,000, and it just arrived on my doorstep with no training, nobody to reach out to for brainstorming cases, and it was a whole lot of work to incorporate that in there and really learn the art of photobiomodulation. When an opportunity came up in 2018 after meeting Andy Hewitson, who is the brain and engineer behind the Avant laser, who is married to a functional neurologist in the country, I took a shine not only to the tool, but to Andy. And Andy created that tool. It's called the Avant laser. And he created it with a honeydew list in his hand for his wife. You see, her laser broke down, and they had first started dating. And you remember what we do when we first start dating? Anything that needs to be done. And Andy took that laser apart because she didn't want to send it in and spend $3,000 on a repair. He said he could do a much better job, and she supported him. Now, since 2018, I've been the clinical director of a distribution company called ShedLight, where we strictly distribute the Avant Wellness Laser catalog.
And so, when we back up, even further than that, what got you to that direction of, maybe we should be even back up to like what the basics of red light, because it's really just that, right? It's light, it's photons. Give me some insight into kind of the basic understanding of how, when we talk about lasers, when we talk about red light, how that works.
Absolutely. So let's go even further back to 1938. Let's go back to Dr. Otto Warburg, who won a Nobel Prize for proving that chronic disease, specifically he was studying cancer, but let's say any disease, cannot thrive in an area of higher voltage. In other words, AKA, an environment of oxygen and blood. So, follow forward to electrons, photons, negative ions, and frequencies. These are the tools that a healer might use to help somebody's body to heal. Right? We learned a lot. I grew up allopathic, and my mom took me to the white jacket doctor 3 times a year. And in that system, I didn't know about the innate immune system, the body healing itself. We learned about that in school. I know you were raised the same way.
Right.
You and I were both inspired to get into learning about helping a body to heal because we became family men, right?
Right.
We had an inspiration, something didn't seem right. Maybe there was a bigger something that we needed to study to understand. And probably what fueled us both the most is having children. Right? We have to protect those little eggshells. So when it comes to red light therapy, I want to keep it real simple. We can get into the neurophysiological big words, the 10,000 words that we learned in medical school, chiropractic school, or we could just think about a dysfunction in the body. Now, I know you and I went to school and we studied several things, but if I were to boil that down, we learned to diagnose weakness and then strengthen it. We learn to find deficit and fill it. We learn to locate interference and remove it. One of the tools that we picked up to make our job easier is the red light therapy, the laser, the different wavelengths, the photon gun. When we think about photons, we think about the sun. When we think about electrons, we think about the earth. When we think about negative ions, which are just happy atoms with us extra electrons they want to give us, we bring it all together with energy. Always when there's a dysfunction in the body, whether it be functional, I can't move my finger well, or a broken toe, those areas, the areas in charge of the finger or the broken toe, are areas of low voltage trying to heal. What a laser does is it adds energy from the outside in to boost the voltage, to speed up healing, and it inspires the cells in that area, the mitochondria within, to produce more ATP. So a double kiss of energy. As a result, inflammation decreases and blood and oxygen enters, and the healing process called chemotaxis begins faster. back to Otto Warburg, proving that chronic disease cannot thrive in an area of oxygen. Oxygen is teamed with blood, aka voltage.
So what you're saying is that the body needs energy to do everything that it does. And what that red light can do, which, I think it's really incredible to think about. This is something we are exposed to every day from the sun, right? That is one of the reasons that we talk about going out early in the morning and getting that early morning sunlight, because you're going to get more of those red light and infrared light wavelengths. They're all different types of wavelengths, right? There's also lasers that are different types of wavelengths. So you have red light, you have blue light, you have violet light. All of those things can do different things. But yes, it comes down to this simple concept, right? That the body needs energy to do anything it does. It needs that voltage. We are very electrical from every sense, and using that red light basically activates that energy to let the body do what it needs to do. And when you think of it from that concept, it really is incredible. Is there anything that you theoretically almost could not treat with that concept?
No, even out of Harvard University, there's a big wig in the world of photobiomodulation. His name is Michael Hamlin, and he's written many textbooks, and he was given free rein to study photobiomodulation, although it's been studied since the 50s. And you can Google photobiomodulation and anything and get a hit. But this is what Michael Hamlin wrote. Laser therapy should be on the forefront of all conditions because there are so few side effects and the benefits are enormous. Okay? The safety, the results, especially when directed by a practitioner or even a layperson that has a little guidance on where to point and shoot it, right? It's really easy to point and shoot at a boo-boo like a broken toe. But how do we make it a tool in things a little bit more complicated that require thought and consideration? Stuff that we study, like people on the spectrum, right? Like a stroke, like ALS. There are many conditions, and it's been stamped in approval by Michael Hamlin, the leading researcher of photobiomodulation to date, right out of Harvard.
Yeah. And so, when you think of, you even talk about like a broken toe or a cut. I know we've had that, having kids, and even myself, I'm not the most coordinated person on the planet. I'll freely admit that. We've had injuries with, cuts and fractures and things like that. And when, what that means for people, when you increase that energy flow, especially localized to a spot of injury, everything your cells do in a natural repair and healing process are now going to operate not only at the most efficient nature possible, but it's also going to go quicker, right? It will increase the healing time. It's going to increase the body's ability to recover. And, I think we talk about sometimes that's why we get things like arthritis sometimes, because we didn't have enough voltage to complete the healing process from a previous injury, and eventually that breaks down. So it's also, I think, really cool when we start talking about how light can impact our brains, and those different wavelengths, what they do on the nervous system itself when we do shine it on the head. And, I have my greatest story, and you were there to help direct me with our very unique protocol that we off-label protocol that we did with my own son. And he was nonverbal at the time, significant autism, and probably within, I think, 4 to 6 weeks of putting just red light. And I can't say that on the most simplest terms, that this is literally just the color. This is just the light that we see from the sun, which is, to me, I can't get over how something so simple from the universe here can have such powerful impacts on the body's ability to heal. But within 6 weeks of doing that, we were getting words. And it was the most amazing thing to see that. Share with our listeners, why does light do that with a stroke patient or an autistic patient, or even a patient with anxiety? What happens in the brain when we put light on? Because I'm sure the average person thinking, okay, you shine light on your head, or you go out in the sun and get light from the world, it's just going to bounce off that thick skull, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And let's touch upon, let me remind you my version of the story with Jacob, your son. Is on a Sunday night, you and I were brainstorming what to do with Jacob, right? And we came up with, why don't we laser a little bit farther from the body in a sustained, complete energy distribution in areas of local low voltage within the body, right? Remember, the body is, this, motion is the potion. When I'm moving around, I'm creating piezo electricity from my joints. That's going all over my body. Piezo electricity is the electricity that comes off when you crush a crystal. It lets ions go. Now we have biophotons and electrons that help us communicate with our nervous system and our meridian systems. Chinese medicine has been around since I was born, right? Maybe a little bit longer than that, right? So we were on the phone, and the hard part was what we learned in school is being able to diagnose not only the fact that the voltage in that little boy's body was low, he was a dimmer light bulb than most. We located the barriers that were stopping the nervous system from communicating around the body successfully. We located deficits. And you and I decided in an educated manner where to point and shoot that laser. And I remember, do you remember that week when you were texting me and you were getting text messages from the teachers? All right. And we talked the following Sunday or 2 weeks later with the results that you were already seeing. And that was a Sunday night as well. And we were both in tears. Remember that?
There's no way to not forget that. And I'll never forget, with the process of trying to bring that tool into, everything I've done in my practice was first introduced into my home, and then it kind of seeped into the practice kind of later. But that was a challenge to get even, my wife to buy on, like, what is this light going to do? And I think it's important for people to realize that light will penetrate the skull. It will get past that barrier. And it's really interesting what happens is, like, yes, you're raising up that voltage, but it's literally making new neurons, new connections, new wiring. It's like, being an electrician almost on someone's, brain and nervous system. But you're absolutely correct, is that the key to that is, especially with things like, it's one thing with like a concussion or a head injury or a stroke where you can say, okay, we know where the damage is. We know where the point is where we can concentrate that light to make an improvement of where whenever there's an injury or insult, there's been a disconnect then. But with something like autism or ADHD or dyslexia or anxiety, you kind of have to know, and that is the challenge. I would say that is the point where it gets past of, you can't just go on Amazon, right, and get a helmet or a hat that just throws, red light therapy wherever. You have to know where that low voltage and underconnected point is. And that comes with, a lot of training and a lot of, different guidance that's, needed. And I think that's where functional neurology is needed a lot more in this world, not only for all these brain issues we're talking about, but it's always good. I like to go a step even further back. It's not all psychological, neurological type symptoms that we're talking about with this. The brain controls everything, right? It's controlling your immune system. It's controlling digestion. It's controlling how your gut moves, how quickly that moves or doesn't move. Oftentimes I find constipation, for instance, not to be a physiological problem. It's not always you're not getting enough fiber. It's oftentimes that your brain is not, your vagus nerve is not sending the appropriate signals to your gut to mobilize it. So those are things that I think are important to realize on how powerful this can be, but it does take some expertise and some guidance, especially when you're dealing with the nervous system, outside of just, like you said, a cut or something like that. But what I would say too, as we talk about this is that, where in your life have you seen, like personally, where has red light really impacted you as far as like changing your world?
Well, a couple places, and I absolutely agree. We look for imbalance. And what we were just talking about was life is stressful. Life is stressful. And as such, some of us have Achilles heels wherein our brain is a little bit imbalanced and not doing its job. Our cortex is not doing its job, and it's not holding back the sympathetic nervous system like it used to. Like when I was born in 1968, things were quieter back then. There was less to fret about because you knew about less, right?
Yeah, the world's basically got us in survival mode all the time, right? This
Absolutely,
fight
or flight. Yeah. Exactly. So you have an explosive bowel movement, and then you don't go to the bathroom for many days because you're dehydrated, right? All based on parasympathetics and sympathetics, and maybe a little magnesium. You mentioned the efficacy I found. Not only, remember, ShedLight, as director of ShedLight, I have clinically guided probably 4,000 doctors globally and just as many people who haven't studied what we have studied, usually patients of other docs that had the need, the desire, or the abundance to have one of these tools in their home to further treatment, right? I'll tell you that my daughter was born 17 years ago, and as she progressed and developed, she had a lazy eye. And everybody in my ex-family, if you will, wanted me to take her and have an operation and try to straighten out that lazy eye that was pointing medially. And what did I do? I fought back that criticism. And from the age of 1, 2, 2.5, I lasered certain portions of her brain and did exercises with her. You could see in her pictures growing up that lazy eye. Now, she's 17 years old, and thank God we didn't have things snipped and cut around that eye because things would never be the same. She was still in development, right?
Right.
But she no longer has that lazy eye. Now, a couple of years ago, I don't know if I told you the story. A couple of years ago, my mom was living with my sister, and she was diagnosed with bad stuff. Yeah, she's 82 years old, and there was only so much limits of matter. There's only so much that we can do. And I procrastinated in getting in the car from Texas to drive to Michigan. Fear, I'm going to lose my mother, right?
Right.
But I got the phone call, I got the text, I got my bothersome sister, whom I love, badgering me to get up here. There's not much time left. So I drove through the night. I got there the next day, 25 hours, 26 hours, 27 hours, and I arrived that night. And my mom had been catatonic for days. Now, when you think of somebody being catatonic and in the bedroom away from any kind of photon, electron, any kind of energy, what happens is, like the immune system that needs energy, she became a dim light bulb. Her frontal lobes had shut down, lack of energy. She couldn't communicate, and she was sitting in a static position for many days. And I arrived. And I remember going to bed. I arrived 10:30, 11, and we woke up in the morning, and I started lasering her frontal lobes. And I used the Resimax, just another tool, to stimulate through another neural pathway, and she woke up.
Wow.
Now, the first thing she did was yell at me, because she's my mom. And then she wanted me to take her to the bathroom. And she was hard to understand, but her eyes were clear. Her body had given up. All right. So we put her in the wheelchair, and she was emaciated. And that morning, this was 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock in the morning. Now, I continued to laser her. I continued to create metabolic activity, energy in that brain. And I sat next to her for 2.5, 3 hours while she was watching her church programs and trying to get out of the wheelchair. Because what would you and I do? We would rage against the dying of the light no matter what, right?
Right.
I kept telling you, it's funny. She's looking over at me. She's, Donald. My mom calls me Donald. That's my real name. Donald, get me out. And she would try so hard, and she would fall back. Now, we all knew what was going on, right? She was on hospice, all that stuff. And I told her to relax one too many times. And my father used to tell her to relax. Sarah, relax. And then she snapped out of her head, just yelling at me. There was love in her eyes, and she was aware, and she was there, and she expended that energy. And by 11:30, she was falling to the side of the wheelchair, and it was time to put her back in bed. Right? The hospice nurse came shortly thereafter, and she passed away 3 hours later.
But what an amazing thing to be able to have at least those last moments.
Absolutely.
With your mom. So, for people listening to this, they're probably thinking, wow, this is cool. This has a lot of applications. Not everyone, we're not on every street corner, people who do this types of therapy, obviously. And hopefully that increases tremendously. But, when we talked a little bit about the sun and different things, I think of a simple concept for people to take forward that they need to increase their voltage. So if you didn't have a laser or a red light, how would you recommend the average person go about trying to do that?
So education, right? Dr. Jerry Tennant with a T, Jerry with a J. You can find his books online. He's an MD. He's an ophthalmologist. He used to be my doctor. He put together a whole lot of knowledge, consolidated in one book. And he gained that knowledge not only from doing his own studies. He's an electron master. We're photon masters, but we use electrons too, right? God's healing tools, God's healing items. I think that every human being should have that book, Healing His Voltage, on their nightstand. It should become their permanent plane ride read. In there, you'll learn so much about how to keep your body and your brain, well, your organs, if you will, clean and clear. Have a long, prosperous life. And if something happens, you're going to have knowledge from that book, from podcasts like this, to help your body to heal. Jerry Tennant.
That's great. That's a great resource. And, I know for what we tell patients is, a lot of it is not sucking the voltage out that your body naturally creates. Theoretically, our body should create the voltage we need to do what we need. You mentioned kind of innate healing. And that is something that it should be, but we have to take care of our bodies for that to operate. So, healthy eating real food, avoiding processed foods, exercising, also getting that early morning light from the sun, I think is something that is also a really beneficial tool, because you're going to get red and infrared light. When our ancestors, they were exposed to that every day, right? They lived outside, and it was God's tool to give them that energy, especially at that time where they had a lot of fight and flight too, right? Because they had to survive. They were on a constant survival level. So, that kind of stress, it's different, but it's not necessarily unique to just our time and our society. But we have to take a lot of action steps, and we're being bombarded, whether it's technology, crappy food, chronic stress, being stuck indoors most of the day, all of these things are sucking our voltage, and we do have to take some action steps to try to kind of help repair that. Any other tips you would give the average person?
I don't know. Let's think about it globally. Who doesn't love the beach? Who doesn't love a mountain river? Walking along, taking the time, taking your shoes off, walking with somebody who gives you joy. Let's think about that, because energy has the ability to deliver information. Energy. Walking along the beach with your wife, you know you're sucking up the electrons from the earth, the photons from the sun, those negative, happy ions that are giving you electrons. As a result, your global voltage begins to rise and you feel good. AKA, your dim light bulb becomes bright. AKA, your low immune system becomes high, on point. Taking the time out to put your feet on the ground and getting a recharge is probably one of those secrets to a long life, right?
So what you're saying is get off social media and go outside and touch some grass.
Try. I love me some Instacart too. I mean Instagram. But at 5:30 in the morning, this morning I was having an onboarding session with a doctor in Georgia who bought a laser. I was teaching her how to use the tool, and we were brainstorming about different things, including energy. And I was out in a park in the dark watching the sun come up with my shoes off, getting my voltage.
There you go. That's awesome. So it doesn't have to just be from this technology. The energy is out there. We just have to embrace it and, try to utilize, frankly, what God's given us out there. So that's really helpful hints. So if people want to learn more about kind of this higher level, use it in a more, therapeutic sense, like we were, have talked about throughout this episode, where would they go?
Well, of course, just start with general education. Google photobiomodulation or laser therapy and anything, and then narrow it down. You can absolutely find ShedLight, which is a distributor of the Avant Wellness catalog of lasers, at ShedLightLaserTherapy.com. You can email me, ShedLight, ShedLight, LLC@gmail.com, and I can answer any questions for you. Just general Google. I think everything should start with educating yourself, talking to your doctors about it, and then moving forward with those detailed questions. Right? Finding the right practitioner is the most important thing, right? Because it's not always. Sometimes it is about a pill. Sometimes it is about surgery. Right? But most of the time, even if those are the solutions, I would say all the time, learning about how the body works, how it works with biophotons, electrons, and photons, should be on your list of needs in any condition.
That's awesome. And so that's the big take home here is first steps, get outside, get that energy from the sun, from the environment, from nature, from your loved ones. Being with other people is another great source of that. And then, if we need to go into more higher level stuff, that's where, you're my laser guy. That's why I love having you around and be able to bounce these things off and utilize your expertise. Well, Dr. Griswold, I really appreciate you coming on the podcast today. Do you have any other, you mentioned the website, any other social media or anything they can follow you at?
Well, there's Dr. Griswold DC on Instagram. You can always follow what's out there about the Avant Wellness Systems, Andy Hewitson, and that catalog of lasers. They're the most powerful 3B lasers on the planet, which makes them very rare with new technology wrapped into a new package. And you'll discover that Andy, with his brilliant mind, his caring heart, has turned the world of photobiomodulation over and has become a focal point in that world. Yeah.
That's awesome. All right, Dr. Griswold, well, thank you for joining us. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for another episode of the NeuroTrition Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast at NeuroTrition Podcast on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, anywhere you get your podcast from. You can also visit us at the neurotritionpodcast.com, and we look forward to seeing you at our next episode.